a melon. What is this melon that I've found? It's called a tsamma melon. It's also called a fodder melon, a citron melon, a bitter watermelon, and a preserve melon, because the rind is very high in pectin, which is useful for making preserves. But what else can you do with it? What else is it useful for? If you look it up in a book, you'll discover that the tsamma melon is called Citrullus lanatus. And that sounds very familiar, because if you look up Citrullus lanatus, you'll find that it's the same scientific name as the common sweet watermelon that you find in your grocery store. Now, I said it with a bit of a French twang, because a French botanist once told me a story about these melons. The sweet watermelon that you find in the grocery store has been pretty well studied. Like a lot of cultivated species are studied. Now they research a lot of stuff about how to increase yields, what kind of pests they have, and this kind of thing. But they were never quite sure of what the ancestor of the big sweet watermelon that you find, the cultivated watermelon, they weren't sure what its ancestor was. And for a long time they thought that it must be some kind of wild melon that you find in southern Africa. But the Afrikaans name that you heard me say, bitter watermelon, means a bitter melon. Maybe it's just bitter melon. Either way, the bitterness will give you a hint that maybe this isn't the direct progenitor of the sweet melons that you get in the shops. So they thought maybe that sweet melon, the ancestor of the cultivated melon, was a variety of this bitter melon. But nobody could find it. So this was first described in 1770. It was found by a guy in the sands just north of Cape Town, kind of sandy areas. You find these growing all over the place. And he described it as Citrullus lanatus. And as botanists are wont to do, took a sample, mostly of the leaves, and leaves, by the way, are a very bad way of identifying this group, and put it in a herbarium in Uppsala in Sweden. And he described it as Citrullus lanatus because when they are young, these fruits are quite hairy, and lanatus means hairy or woolly. So these fruits are covered in hairs when they're baby fruits. Great. Everything sounds wonderful. Great. Wonderful. No problems yet. But if you fast forward 150 years to about the 1930s, taxonomists, or the people that name species, decided it would be a good idea to assign physical specimens to all of the names of things that they give. It's called a type specimen. It's something we still do today. So someone went through the archives of the herbarium in Sweden and found those old shriveled up leaves and assigned them to the sweet watermelon and said that it's just a cultivar of this wild melon. So with the species name Citrullus lanatus attached to the cultivated watermelon, the sweet one, all that research that was done to figure out, the pests, increasing yields, etc., all the scientific literature that had been written about the cultivated watermelon was using the name Citrullus lanatus. But then, about 4 years ago, someone decided, let's do some genetic tests on these melons. And they found something quite different. They found that the sweet watermelon was not actually closely related to this melon that they found in Cape Town after all. That shouldn't be a big problem then. Just call the sweet watermelon something else, and then give it its own type specimen. They decided that that was a bad idea, because it would have been a huge pain in the ass to change the sweet melon's scientific name, Citrullus lanatus, because of all those papers that had been written about it. It would cause a lot of confusion, and people wouldn't know what's going on if they were referring to this Citrullus lanatus or the sweet watermelon. So they thought, because this one is so poorly known and less popular than the sweet watermelon, then let's change the name of this, which is some real botanical bullshit if you ask me. So they changed the name of this melon to Citrullus amarus, and effectively the sweet cultivated watermelon stole the scientific name of this melon, Citrullus lanatus. So now we've got the sweet watermelon called Citrullus lanatus, which, remember, this was called Citrullus lanatus because it had hairy fruit when they're young. And now you've got the sweet watermelon called Citrullus lanatus, and guess what? It doesn't even have hairy fruit when they're young. What the hell's going on there? Terrible naming. But it's the type of story I like. Because even if you find something small like this in the bush, if you know a little bit about the history, as I said in my previous video, it's always quite interesting. You can always have something to say about things. And I like these historical kind of stories. I find them a little bit more interesting than watching a lion sleep, for example. So the genetic study that they did about 4 years ago actually showed that this isn't the ancestor of the sweet watermelon after all. The ancestor is actually somewhere up in West Africa, not this one from just north of Cape Town. Which is a bit disappointing, but it makes a lot more sense. There are a few other members of the group found in South Africa, in the rest of Africa as well, that are also pretty interesting. There's a type of cucumber that grows its fruit underground. Now, why would you grow fruit underground? How would the seeds disperse? What's the point of having a fruit? You stick it underground. Well, in these arid areas, there is something that likes to dig up those underground cucumbers and eat them. So it's the aardvark comes along and digs up this particular underground cucumber and eats it, we think, to get moisture. You know, in places where it's pretty dry, they seek out these underground cucumbers and eat them and ingest the seeds, and off they go, poop them out, and there's your seed dispersal. So those underground cucumbers are completely reliant on aardvark to disperse their seeds. So without aardvark, you're not going to get those cucumbers persisting into the future. So if you lose one species, potentially you could lose a lot more. And we think maybe the aardvark, unlike a lot of other things that eat ants and termites, we think that maybe they've retained those tiny little teeth, which are fairly useless for anything, we think they've retained those teeth so that they can break into these underground cucumbers and access the water, which is quite interesting to think about.